And when this kind of awareness arises, my responsibility to that also arises, and these analyses have been very creative on both sides, and the people themselves, the end of analysis is really into creation, like a person becoming a musician. And there is a woman who is a very famous singer today who talked about it. She gave an interview one day, and so and she's one of those who said, I said to her one day, do you mind if I make an exhibition of my diaries? Because I ask everybody, and there's lines nobody can recognize because I don't write the whole story. I write one line from one patient, and then another line from another, and then a line for myself. And you cannot, but I ask permission. And I said, do you mind if I show my notebooks in an exhibition? And he said, are you laughing at me? I mean, my second disc is, each one is a painting that I'm watching. She's lying like that, she sees painting. So, of course, if you realize and you accept that whatever it is that the analyst brings really enters the process, then I think that the more evolved the analyst himself about his own creativity, the more creativity there is in the process. It's as simple as that. There's no point of hiding or putting white wall. There is much more, there's no point of, I'm not going to tell her my life. If you are, as a patient, said to me, I go to a film and I saw this and this, I'm not going to say, oh, me too, I saw this film yesterday, because we are not talking about me. But my level of development enters all these reattunements. And you can see with the awareness to that there are some kind of the speeding creativity processes. Really, you speed time in that sense, you slow time in other senses. And in some examples, there's really, this atmosphere was beneficial. But also, of course, you choose to go to an analyst who is an artist, you have to be aware of the consequences of that. But it's the same when the analyst doesn't tell who he is, and he's bourgeois in the 5th arrondissement in Paris. It's also influential, even if you don't put anything on the wall. So the thing is about becoming aware of your contribution, the way you subjectivize the other, and subjectivized by the other, and so on, and put it in the service of everybody.
You also ask, how do you get rid of the patient? No?
Yeah.
Exit.
You get rid of, no, when they, in my experience, you know, for Freud it was when they find love and work. In my experience, there is a certain really degree of creativity that they don't need me, that you leave behind, like, and also from my experience, it is when after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, when something happens that they want to discuss, they come back for sessions of analysis. And because I move between countries, in my experience, it doesn't matter. You can live in one country, work in the other, you know. There's a lot of freedom in that sense. If you capture these waves and you enter into reattunement, it works in distances just as well.
For one of Wolfgang's classes, some of us read Humanism of the Other.
Excuse me?
For one of Wolfgang's classes, some of us read Humanism of the Other.
Levinas.
Yeah. And as you were describing the Matrixial, it sounded a lot like an empirical basis for his idea of, you know, the pre-subjective responsibility to the other. But then you were saying that that you departed from his thinking in some ways, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah. I dedicated also an essay to that because I was working with Levinas for a few years, and we were discussing the feminine in Levinas, and where I agree with him and where I don't agree with him. And there's a small book of conversation. Now it is being reproduced in Ljubljana, so that everybody can get it as well, a small portion of the discussion with Levinas. It is very serious. I wouldn't be able to say it in few words. but I would be glad to give you, or those who wish, give you the reference, and you can read this comparison where we agree with him and where I depart from him. Especially on the level of the feminine, you have the question of, you see, I discussed with him the question of the feminine, and he didn't want to speak about it because he left the subject for 20 years or something. And I more or less forced him to talk again about the feminine, and he didn't want. And in the end, he started to talk because I thought that this was very important. And he said, no, I was very much attacked. People didn't understand me. They didn't understand the feminine. So in the end, more or less, I forced him to talk. And you have this feeling that in the feminine there is this extreme of disappearance of the self in order to open for the other. And if I put it very brutally, and I take his words, and he says that the feminine in that sense is that which disappears. In a certain place it talks about the disappearance from the light, but it talks about the feminine of this crazy capacity in the human to disappear so that somebody else appears. So we have here a certain description of birth, which I don't understand, I don't accept, because it leads, or it might lead to the idea of sacrificing yourself while being hospitable. So when I move from the birth to pregnancy, I say both partners needs to be alive in order for the system to be alive. So there is much more in that sense. It's not, the matrixial is not sacrificial. And with Levinas we might, this proto-ethicality could become, and there's other problems, because the many notions are entering the question of father and son and the continuity between father and son. So this is a big discussion, and I have a very detailed essay on that. I'll be glad to leave it with Wolfgang.
I think it's also because your theory, your observations, your phrasing, trying to get very near to the material as such.
Yeah.
That is, it's not the biological, but it is that what the biological means in our lives, very concreteness. And Levinas never had a philosophy of nature, and he acknowledged this to me when I attacked him and told him that through the eyes of a cockroach also God looks at us. And then he said, understand, you're accusing me that I don't have a philosophy of nature, and you are right. I don't see cockroach, I don't see these natural living creatures, because for me it is the idea of the other, of God, of our ethical responsibility. That's why he's so, in terms of ecological ethics, he's not really helpful in there. But anyway, that's just a commentary. And one more question, and then we go home. Yes?
Yeah, to what extent on the level of identity does sexual fidelity become a form of repression, insofar as it tries to suspend or capture sort of the processes of transgressing personal borderlines and the idea of trauma and abandonment, and trying to suspend that action and that sort of copoiesis and becoming across all of this.
Is it a personal question now?
No, so what was the question again?
Sexual fidelity.
No comment. Do what you can. Live your life.
Do what you dare.